Let's roll back to early 2025. That's when the United States chose to unleash what economists often describe as a financial nuclear strike on Venezuela's oil sector. And this wasn't just about blocking its own purchases. The opening move was canceling Chevron's operating license, shutting down the last significant U.S.-run oil production in Venezuela, a network that pumped more than 100,000 barrels per day. But the real shockwave hit on April 2, 2025, when Washington introduced something unprecedented: secondary tariffs. Here's what that meant. The U.S. warned every country on the planet, if you buy even 1 barrel of Venezuelan crude, we'll slap a 25% tariff on all your exports to America, from electronics to furniture. To understand the scale, consider this. Average U.S. tariffs sit near 2%. A sudden 25% surcharge would make any nation's exports instantly uncompetitive. It was a mathematically engineered strategy: crush Venezuela's oil exports by making it financially disastrous for anyone else to purchase from them. This was one of the boldest displays of U.S. economic muscle in the region in decades. The calculation seemed straightforward. No country would jeopardize access to America's $20 trillion marketplace just to deal with a struggling petrostate. But there was a fatal misjudgment baked into that thinking. It ignored the one power that didn't have to make that choice: China. By 2025, the U.S. and China were already knee-deep in their own long-running tariff battle. Chinese exports to the U.S. were already heavily tariffed, so another 25% penalty wasn't a major deterrent. It was just a minor tweak to a reality China was already living with. In other words, China was uniquely shielded from Washington's pressure. Even more significant, Beijing recognized the long-term strategic opening. With countries from Europe to India suddenly terrified of U.S. retaliation, Venezuela's oil became a buyer's market. And China stepped into that vacuum with enormous leverage. They weren't merely purchasing oil, they were becoming the purchaser. Instead of harming China, the U.S. policy cleared the entire competitive field, giving Beijing uncontested access to a strategic energy supply at deeply favorable rates. The sanctions designed to isolate Venezuela instead created a monopoly buyer, a monosony, and China was more than willing to take the role. So with the path cleared by American pressure, China didn't simply increase its purchases quietly. It delivered a statement, one worth billions. In September 2025, while the world debated the fallout of the tariffs, a Chinese firm, China Concord, began installing the first major new offshore oil platform in Venezuela's Maracaibo Lake in years. And this wasn't a small side project. It was a massive, long-term commitment. Its mission: increase output from a modest 12,000 barrels per day to a powerful 60,000 barrels per day by 2026. Think about that. As Washington moved to dismantle Venezuela's oil sector, China injected over $1 billion to expand it, this time under Chinese control. It sent an unmistakable message. China wasn't passing through. It was digging in, physically and financially, for decades. And this wasn't an impulsive reaction. It was the result of a partnership years in development. In 2023, Venezuela became the first Latin American nation to secure what China calls an all-weather strategic partnership. This isn't a symbolic phrase. It's Beijing's highest diplomatic classification, reserved for its most vital allies. It signals that, come sunshine or crisis, China stands firm. It represents a pledge of consistent political and economic backing. So when the U.S. launched its tariff offensive in 2025, it wasn't targeting a fragile relationship. It hit a bond already fortified. This all-weather alliance meant Beijing had already committed to supporting Caracas, making U.S. sanctions predictable and tolerable. The groundwork was poured long before, and it wasn't going anywhere. But the deepest chain linking the two nations is debt. Over the years, China has extended Venezuela an enormous $60 billion in loans. And this isn't paid back in cash. It's settled directly in oil. Imagine a running tab that can only be cleared in one currency: barrels. The arrangement forms a closed loop. Venezuela must ship oil to China to pay down the loan, and China is contractually guaranteed to receive it. U.S. sanctions don't disrupt this cycle. It isn't a free market sale that can be frightened off. It's a legal financial obligation. Even if the U.S. wanted to stop the flow, it couldn't without ordering Venezuela to default on an international agreement. This $60 billion loan is China's ultimate leverage, ensuring a continual stream of oil no matter the geopolitical climate. Now here's the irony. While attempting to cripple Venezuela, the U.S. created a massive headache for its own energy sector. Refineries along America's Gulf Coast in Texas, Louisiana, and beyond were specifically designed to process heavy crude. And one of the best sources for that type of oil? Venezuela. These multi-billion-dollar refineries can't simply switch feedstock like flipping a switch. It's the equivalent of demanding a diesel engine run on gasoline. The result? An urgent, expensive scramble. U.S. refinery operators had to turn to pricier, heavy crude from the Middle East or Canada, while also facing costly technical adjustments. In trying to weaken Venezuela, the U.S. handed its own companies a multi-billion-dollar burden, highlighting a major strategic oversight. So where did all this lead? The numbers from October 2025 reveal the truth. While U.S. sanctions did push Venezuela's total oil exports down by 26%, they failed spectacularly at their primary objective. Instead of drying up, Venezuela's oil simply rerouted overwhelmingly to China. And the figures are astonishing. China was taking in 663,000 barrels per day, around 80% of all oil Venezuela exported. Meanwhile, the U.S., formerly a major buyer, was receiving just 128,000 barrels a day. This wasn't merely dominance, it was near total control. A complete reversal from just a few years earlier, proving that U.S. isolation strategies did not cripple Venezuela. They handed its oil sector to a strategic competitor. Yet China's ambitions went well beyond energy. In November 2025, it unveiled a sweeping zero-tariff trade deal with Venezuela covering 400 product categories, from crops to industrial goods. This matters because it transforms the relationship from simple resource access into deep economic integration. It's not merely about acquiring oil. It's about embedding Venezuela into China's broader supply chain, creating markets, securing raw materials, and binding the two economies together. This zero-tariff framework is the adhesive that makes the partnership enduring. It builds a multifaceted system of interdependence far stronger than a simple oil-for-cash exchange. It is the final structural piece, locking Venezuela securely into China's influence for decades. When we step back, the entire episode stands as one of the most striking strategic miscalculations in modern geopolitics. The U.S. unleashed what it viewed as its most powerful economic tool: global financial isolation. The logic seemed obvious: choke off revenue and force compliance. But the strategy exposed a major flaw in Washington's worldview. It relied on an outdated assumption that America remained the lone, indispensable economic superpower. It overlooked the reality that a parallel economic universe now exists. China has spent decades constructing alternative financial systems, supply routes, and diplomatic networks that function independently of U.S. oversight. So when sanctions hit, Venezuela didn't collapse. It reoriented completely into Beijing's orbit. The U.S. didn't simply fall short of its objective. It engineered the opposite outcome. It delivered China a major strategic win, granting them privileged access to critical energy supplies and a strengthened position in the Western Hemisphere, all at discount prices. It weakened its own influence and showcased the boundaries of its power. The consequences go far beyond oil shipments. This moment illustrates a broader global transition. The unipolar era, dominated by one superpower, is fading. A multipolar world is solidifying. Power is no longer concentrated in one capital. The Venezuela case is the perfect example. A nation under extreme pressure found not just survival, but protection, because an alternative to U.S. power now exists. This has permanently altered the strategic landscape of the Americas. China is no longer just a commercial partner. It has become a guarantor, an investor, and a political shield. This changes the game. It means U.S. policy must now be shaped with Beijing's potential reaction in mind. The rules have shifted. The Venezuelan crisis proves that coercive strategies in today's world carry enormous risks. And the biggest impact may not be the intended one, but the unintentional strengthening of a global rival. We've entered a new age of strategic complexity, where every action creates ripple effects capable of reshaping the global order. So now the question is, did the U.S.'s strategy fail because the world has changed, or because Washington misread its own limits? And more importantly, what does this shift mean for the future balance of power in the Americas? If you found this breakdown valuable, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next deep dive.